So, good morning everyone. Thank you all for making the effort to come here. So, for the next 2 days, we are going to go through a text by someone called Atisha, who was from Bengal, from what is nowadays Bangladesh. So, who has never heard of Atisha? And how many of you consider yourselves to be Buddhist or know anything about this? And how many of you haven't got a clue? Okay. So we will start by explaining a little about who was Atisha. Atisha was, as I say, Bengali. He was, thank you. He was, I think, from a very high family. I'm not sure if he was actually a prince, but he was from a very notable family, and had become a monk at a relatively early age. And he was very much a scholar. He studied under many teachers of those days. He was born in the 10th century and lived into the 11th century, so he's about 1,000 years ago. And he also went to Indonesia, to Sumatra. And just recently now, at the earlier part of this trip which I'm doing, I was also with a group of people. We went to the monastery in Sumatra, where he was studied for about 12 years with great masters there. Apparently this monastic complex in Sumatra, in a place called Jambi, was very eminent 1,000 years ago. It's very, very extensive. I mean, they've only excavated recently maybe a tenth of the extensive, it goes on for miles and miles and miles and miles, all along the coast, and was connected by canals, and was in those days one of the most preeminent centers for Buddhist scholarship, which is why Atisha spent 1 year on a boat traveling from India to Indonesia. I mean, nowadays you just go on a plane and complain because it's a few hours. But in those days it took months and months and months, you know, and with lots of adventurers, as they got nearly shipwrecked and pirates and all sorts of weird things happening. Anyway, then while he was in Indonesia, he was studying especially about something called bodhichitta and lojong, or mind training. Bodhichitta is the aspiration that our spiritual practice is not merely to benefit ourselves, that we don't merely want to attain moksha and leave everyone else behind, but that our intention in practicing the spiritual path is in order to gain the wisdom and skillful means to be able to benefit all beings everywhere throughout time and space. So, therefore, the aspiration to attain enlightenment for the sake of all beings is not just for this lifetime, but extends endlessly throughout time until all sentient beings are liberated. And all sentient beings doesn't just mean human beings, but also animals, birds, beings living in the waters, insects, spirit realms, everything. When all beings are finally liberated, then that completes the Bodhisattva. So he studied about this for many, many years with his teacher in Indonesia. Then he returned to India and he became the chancellor of Vikramashila Buddhist University in Uttar Pradesh, now in Uttar Pradesh. Meanwhile, back in Tibet, Tibet had been converted to Buddhism in the 8th century with the arrival of a great Indian pandit called Shantarakshita and his brother-in-law, who was a great tantric master called Padmasambhava or Guru Rinpoche. So they constructed, with the help of the king, Jetsunma Tenzin, they constructed the first monastery and invited the first group of monks from India to come and establish a monastic Sangha in Tibet. So actually Tibet already had its own shamanic religion called Bon, and so there was quite a lot of opposition from them as they saw themselves being superseded by Buddhism. And various kings, sometimes they were more Buddhistly inclined, sometimes they were more inclined to the Bon, and so there was a certain amount of conflict, a certain amount of merger also, very much. Each learned from the other. But there was also a certain lack of direction. I mean, I'm sure here you all also know about Tantra. And in India, usually if you say so-and-so is a tantric master, people kind of cringe because it is very much associated in people's minds with power, black magic, you know, getting your money or the woman you want, or, you know, harming your enemies and so forth. So it has bad connotations. If it is not combined with this aspiration that we only want the power in order to benefit others and never to harm them, this had been a little bit not emphasized. And also there were many queries. Did we understand things properly? This one says this one says that. People were very confused. So it was getting more degenerate and at the same time more confused. And so there was a strong Dharma king in Western Tibet. And he felt that what they needed was to bring into Tibet a really well-trained Indian master who could set them right again, get them back on the right path and resolve their doubts and their conflicts. So he had heard of Atisha. Atisha by this time was very well known, and his name had even traveled to Tibet. So the king, whose name was Yishi, he invited Atisha to Tibet to help the Tibetans to get back on track. And Atisha said no. He sent a message back saying, no, I'm too old. By this time he was in his 50s, which of course in those days was old, and also to travel to Tibet was very difficult from India even today. And the food is different, climate is different, it's very high, altitude problems, and he didn't know the language. And in every way, he said, ask for somebody else, somebody younger and more vigorous. I'm too old for this sort of thing. So then Yishi, the king, he felt really, Atisha's the only one with the authority to really help us. So I shall go and invite him myself. So he set off towards India via Nepal, which is the easiest route. And on the Nepali border, he was captured by a neighboring king, a Nepali king, and imprisoned. And he was put up for ransom, which was, the ransom was his weight in gold. So his son, who was called Chanchap went around trying to raise that amount of gold. And in the end, he got enough gold for the king's body, his father's body, not enough for the head. So the king, Yishi said, "Don't worry about me, I'm old anyway. Take this gold that you have collected, offer it to Atisha, explain to him the circumstances in which you managed to get it, and say to him, please come to Tibet." So Chanchap did this, and meantime also Atisha was very devoted to the Bodhichitta, the female. You have her statue here, she's looking at me. He was very devoted to Green Tara, and during various parts of his life, she had appeared to him to give him advice as to what he should do. And so again here, he said, "You must go to Tibet." And he said, "I don't want to go to Tibet." And she said, "No, but you're going anyway. And it will shorten your life, but it will be of infinite benefit for beings. So you must go to Tibet." So then Chanchap arrived with his offering and his story of the sacrifice of his father. His father was beheaded, and the money, the gold, which would have otherwise been offered to ransom his body, was given to Atisha, who of course didn't want the gold. But he appreciated the sacrifice on the behalf of such a devout king. And so then he agreed to go to Tibet. And he arrived there, I think, in the early 11th century. He had a hard time. I was recently reading a book on historical book, not just a hagiograph, but a genuine book. And many of the Tibetans who had settled in and had become themselves prominent teachers did not appreciate someone coming from outside and setting them right. And so I had thought that Tibetans welcomed him, but apparently they didn't. Many of them didn't, and he had quite a hard time. But nonetheless, he established a lineage called Kadampa, and his main emphasis was on building foundations. I always talk about building foundations. In a building, any building will only last as long as its foundations. If its foundations are strong, the rest of the building comes up. If we have very shallow foundations, very quickly damp rises, cracks appear, and within a few years you've got a slum. So, although foundations are not very exciting, and people go, "Wow, what fantastic foundations, and who sings that foundation? Well done." Nonetheless, if you have good, strong, solid foundations, the rest of it comes up with problems. And so he very much emphasized foundations, that the important thing was our motivation, that our motivation should be for the benefit of others and not merely in order to, increase our own spiritual knowledge, but that our spiritual knowledge is there for the sake of others. I mean, so many of you are in caring positions here, and you are using your life to benefit others. So you understand this very well. And just as a doctor, a genuine doctor will train to learn medical skills, not so that he can cure himself if he gets sick, but in order to be able to benefit many, many other beings. That's his motivation, hopefully not just to get a good name and lots of money, but genuinely because he sees so many people are sick, I am ignorant, I don't know how to help them, I will study hard and practice so that I can use my life to benefit many beings because of my knowledge. So this also in the spiritual world, a genuine practitioner is practicing in order to gain the necessary wisdom and compassion and understanding in order to be able to benefit many who really are in need of some genuine guidance. Not just in this lifetime, but lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, rather than just leaving. You vow to come back in order to be of benefit for all sentient beings. So this was very much his emphasis. Why are you doing these tantric practices? It's not to gain power so that then you can, do all sorts of miraculous things or get lots of students or, benefit people in a worldly sense. But we are trying to gain inner power and understanding and illumination in order to be able to genuinely benefit beings. And the other side of it was his teachings, which his later students also carried on and wrote many wonderful texts on something called mind training, which is how to take all the difficulties which we encounter in the world and use them as the path. So often when we want to practice, obstacles come up, difficulties come up, challenges come up, and we think, well, I would practice, but there's this problem, that problem, I'm sick, I'm having problems here, I'm having difficulties there. And we assume that these are obstacles on the path. And so his teachings and these texts show us how far from being obstacles, they are the opportunities on the path. And so these very difficulties that we face are our opportunity to strengthen inside. That we're not fair weather practitioners. We only can practice when the sun shines. We also can practice during the storms. And maybe that is a genuine practice when we have to take everything that happens to us, the good things and the difficult things. Everything is a teaching. Everything we can use. So this way of dealing with our problems and difficulties and sickness and death and so forth became a very significant part of the teachings of the Kadampa school, and later they were incorporated into all the other Tibetan lineages. So all lineages practice these texts and teachings which were passed on through the Kadampa school. So Atisha became belonging to everybody. In our nunnery in Himachal Pradesh, we have frescoes around the wall, and most of them are dealing with various female Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and nuns and so forth, because it's a nunnery and I wanted that the most of the iconography should be female. So often you go into a nunnery and all the figures of enlightenment are male. All the scholars and the male bodhisattvas and male Buddhas. It's the message given to the girls is, sorry girls, pray hard, come back next lifetime as a male, and you can get on with the job. So to counteract that, that image, which is subtly being given to you as all the figures around you are male ones in a nunnery, I requested the artists to make female figures of devotion, which they very happily did. But we have one wall which shows Atisha in the center. And then above him on one side are the founders of the Sakya school, of the Gelugpa school, of Guru Rinpoche and the Nyingma school, and then a few Kaju. But we're a Kaju nunnery, so we don't need Kajus. But it shows this non-sectarian attitude that Atisha was his views and his ideas were incorporated into all the traditions, and commentaries on these basic works are in all traditions. So he was a very, very important figure in the Tibetan school. He set them right. In other places where Tantra had spread, like Thailand, Burma, Sri Lanka, eventually it died out because it became corrupt. In Tibet it did not become corrupt because of, I think, mainly because of Atisha, that his emphasis on pure motivation, on compassion, on how the important thing is, really taking other beings onto the path and so forth. And hello. It's really kept them on track. It really kept them on track. And you'll see it in this text where many of the very orthodox lines are given a twist by him to show that it's not siddhis and supernormal powers which are important, but do we have a good heart? And our negative emotions growing less. This is a real sign of our accomplishment. So we will get started. So he rather starts by throwing us in the deep end of the swimming pool, wherein either we are going to swim or drown, but it gets a little easier later on. Okay? So the first verse on training the mind, when he says the mind, please, all of you know that the word which is being translated as mind is the word chitta. And chitta doesn't just mean the intellectual mind, but it means much more the heart. So it's the mind-heart, right? And that's what it's talking about. And so the basis is much more here than just up here. So when it says mind, think chitta. Right? The supreme learning is to realize the meaning of selflessness, or the absence of self. So, Buddhism has three fundamental views on life that our unenlightened existence, samsara, is essentially unsatisfactory. We always have this underlying sense of dis-ease, unease, which is called dukkha. That however things are going, there's always either things are very, very well, we're afraid they're going to change, or things are difficult, and that's very over dukkha. But the underlying, as long as our minds are governed by our greed and aversion and the ignorance which bases it in an unchanging, solid I at the center of everything, we will suffer. We suffer dukkha because we cling. We think that the more we are attached, the more secure and happy we will be. And we do not realize that the cause of our unease is just this grasping mind, that we cannot hold things gently, but we want to hold on tight. And the holding on tight in itself causes dukkha, because the second point, everything is impermanent, everything is changing, everything is moving. So we're trying to grasp onto a flowing river. But as we know, in a river, if you want to get water, you have to cup your hands open. Then you can drink. If we say, oh, it's a river, I'm so thirsty, and we grasp like that, then you open your hand, there's no water. So the fact that everything is impermanent and flowing, but that we try to cling and grasp at it, causes dukkha. And the fundamental cause of this dukkha and this non-acceptance of impermanence and change, which is happening moment to moment to moment to moment, everything is changing. At a subatomic level, there is never any static moment. Everything is changing constantly. The cells in our body, our mind, even things which seem like very permanent, if we saw them at, as I say, at a subatomic level, we would see that everything is whirling around constantly. It's our perception which sees it as static, but that is a delusion. The main problem behind it all is that we do not know who we really are. And so we grasp on to a sense of me and mindness as if it was something very unique, unchanging, constant, almost solid. This sense of I, and from that, mine, me. And we feel if we can just hold on to this sense of I-ness, that we will feel better. And we don't recognize that this is our fundamental delusion. It is avidya. Right? Vidya meaning to know, avidya means we don't know. So it's our fundamental ignorance that we identify with all the things which are not me. And so it's this grasping itself. Therefore he says, the supreme learning, the supreme knowledge and understanding is to realize what an absence, not an-atman, right? Hinduism talks a lot about Atman, Buddhism talks a lot about an-atman. But I think ultimately they're talking probably about the same thing. Because when the Buddha talked about Atman, he was not talking about the Upashanic view of Atman. He was talking about the sense of me and mine, I, when we say I. When we say I, we are identifying with, I say, who are you? And you give me your name. And then if we're thinking about it, we think about our gender, our nationality, our profession, our status. In India, people are very identified with their caste, and religion, beliefs, ideas, and so forth. All of this we grasp at and think this is I. And so we think that there's something there inside us which is holding it all together like a spider in a web. We're endlessly weaving our web, but at the center there is this spider that is the true me. And the Buddha said, try to find it. All right, you think, well, just look. Well, we cannot be our thoughts, because our thoughts are changing moment to moment. We cannot be our body, because when we die, most of us can lose bits, and we still are here. And even our heart can be replaced, our kidneys can be replaced, almost anything can be replaced nowadays, but we're still here. And when we die, our consciousness carries on, the body's left behind. So we're not the body. Obviously, if we're not the body, we're not our gender, we're not our social status, we're not our profession. All of these are irrelevant. They are useful, but they change. So who is this I? And so in Buddhism, a lot of the attention is given to searching for this sense of a me behind the thoughts and feelings. And it's like peeling an onion. The more you peel, waiting to get to the core, but then there is no core. So when the Buddhism says there is no self, it does not mean that we do not exist. Obviously, we exist. But we do not exist how we think we exist. And the fact that we limit ourselves to this sense of this little ego, this little self, is ultimately the cause of our suffering. Because this little self grasps out to reach and hold on to what it likes and pushes away what it doesn't like. And so we are whirling around in a world of greed and aversion, which is fueled by our lack of understanding of our true nature. So meditation in Buddhism is not really just to make us calm and peaceful. That's almost irrelevant. The important thing is to develop the skills to investigate, rather like Ramana Maharshi's view, that who am I? That's the ultimate question. And all the ideas we come up with, all the thoughts of our identity that the mind throws up, it's just the ego trying to cover its own poverty, its own nakedness. So there are levels of consciousness which go beyond the I. And that is what we have to discover, that our whole being opens up when the self, the sense of self, dissolves into a much deeper level of consciousness. So, which is called waking up. Buddha needs to wake. And so it's a sense of waking up from this dream that we are at the moment all projecting. So therefore, this is why Atisha puts it at the very beginning. The fundamental cause of the path is to wake up from the dream of samsara, which is propitiated by this false sense of I and self. As I say, when the Buddhists talk about non-self, it doesn't mean that we disappear or we sort of space out. It's a sense of vibrancy and waking up. All the great gurus, not just Buddhists, but any genuine guru, is very impressive by their sense of inner aliveness and wisdom and understanding that the mind expands beyond our little tiny sense of protecting me and mine. It becomes universal. Our love is not just about protecting our family and our friends and people we like, but becomes unconditional. Our compassion becomes unconditional. Our wisdom becomes unconditional. So it's like breaking open this tiny little box which is keeping us so small and opening it up to universality. Because this is the most important thing we can do for ourselves and for others. Therefore, the Atisha puts it at the very, very beginning. If we could really understand who we are, then that would solve so many problems in our life. But because we grasp at this unreal sense of me and mine and ego, therefore we suffer and we cause suffering to others. So therefore, but I didn't do it from today. The supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. So we we think of discipline as being, regulating our body, regulating our speech, the precepts, and so forth, not killing, not stealing, and so forth. So we think of discipline as being like the army, regimented. And, or if you see, a group of nuns, well-trained monks or nuns together, their body language is very disciplined. But the source of this is our mind. Because everything which we do and we say comes first through the mind. Action, karma, the Buddha said, is intention. So it's a mental, what is our intention, then we speak and act. So if we tame our mind, then everything else is tamed. If we have a tamed mind, our speech will be tamed, our actions will be tamed. But if we have a wild mind, untamed mind, even if outwardly we are tamed, eventually there will be a breakout, because there will be the conflict between the wild mind and, pretending to be very well disciplined on the outside. So the source of everything is our mind. Buddhism talks all the time about the mind in the sense of citta. Deal with your mind, everything's dealt with. Even if outwardly there may be problems, if the mind is tamed, we can deal with it. The source of it is to deal with our own mind. Shantideva, who was a great Indian scholar of the 8th century, he says, they're endless on the ground. In those days they didn't have many paved walkways. He said, so the earth is covered in thistles and sharp stones, and, when we're walking barefoot, then, what are we going to do? We're going to always be hurting the soles of our feet. So should we carpet the whole world? And, he says, obviously that's not possible. We cannot put leather over the whole world so that we can walk nicely without hurting ourselves. But it's not necessary, because if we put leather under the soles of our feet in the form of sandals and shoes, we can walk everywhere. Likewise, we cannot expect that everyone else out there is going to say and do what we want them to say and do. The world is the world. Samsara is samsara. It's always going to be difficult. It's not one thing, it's another. But if we tame our own mind, then whatever we meet with, there will be no problem. And this is the point, that the way to live in this world is with a well-tamed mind. Then whatever we meet from outside, we can deal with it, because we're protected by our own mind. And so this is very, very important. The Buddha, when he started his advice for how people should practice, apart from receiving the precepts, which this is like being back in Pune. Apart from receiving the precepts which guard our outer conduct, the precepts of not taking life and not stealing, and a precept against any kind of sexual exploitation or misconduct, and the precepts about having speech which is not only truthful but also kind, non-divisive, and not just lots of gossip and idle chatter. And then also the precept against alcohol and drugs, because intoxicants bring up, cause us to lose control, and open the door to all sorts of negative emotions, as we know. so much crime in the world, so much domestic violence is fueled by intoxicants. People do things when they're drunk, which they would never do in ordinary life when they're sober. So that starts it. That is the fence around the garden of the heart. But then the Buddha said, now learn how to develop attention and calm the mind. So our minds are usually like waterfalls, just flashing down. We don't even usually know it. We don't even recognize it because we're swept along by that. So we don't even recognize how tumultuous and out of control our mind is. But it's sort of like having a television on in our mind the whole time. You know, with all the soap operas and with all the news and with all the endless advertisements and just all the endless reruns, just blaring out endlessly. We can't turn the volume down. And, you know, so blah, 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 endlessly. Most people are so used to this that we don't even notice it. The only time we are aware of it is when we sit down and try to bring the mind to one point and ignore the background television going on. Then we know how noisy the mind is, how distracting the mind is, how out of control the mind is. And so, of course, as I'm sure many of you know, when people first start to meditate, they complain their mind is worse than before, that they're thinking more than they ever did before. But of course, then they are always told this is a good sign. It shows we are becoming more conscious of how noisy our mind normally is, but we don't notice it because we're so used to it and because we get swept along like a very fast-flowing river in monsoon. We're just swept along by our mind, and we have no raft, we have no boat on which to, you know, hold and take us above the waves. So therefore, the first kind of meditation is that of normally in Buddhism observing the breath as it goes in, especially breath as it goes out. It's not pranayama, we're just breathing normally, but now we are bringing our attention to the breath and noticing the breath as it goes in and out and ignoring the background noise. We're not trying to stop the mind, but we're just not giving it attention. It's like if we were in a room with the television on, but we are reading a book or, you know, working on a computer or anywhere. Our attention is not on the television, our attention is on what we're doing. So though the television is still going, we're ignoring that because our attention is elsewhere. So therefore, the first step is to develop this ability to pay attention, to be more mindful, more aware. And at the same time, the Buddha taught us how to generate loving kindness and maitri, or metta, first towards ourselves. It's very important, you ladies who are working to benefit others, who are working with all these children with various deprivations, that you also give love and kindness to yourself and compassion. The Buddha said we start with ourselves. We have to fill up before we can empty out. If we just keep emptying out, then the glass becomes empty. It's like with you know, a computer or any kind of app, smartphone, you have to recharge. If we don't recharge, the battery goes flat. And then we cannot help ourselves, we cannot help others. So it's very important that we give in, we recharge. And one way is by learning how to calm the mind and develop our attention, our presence, sense of presence, and at the same time to give loving kindness and compassion to ourselves first, then to those we love, those we are indifferent towards, then goes toward those who create problems for us, difficulties, people we don't, we don't like so much, wishing them well and happy and to be free from suffering. And then all the world, because all beings want to be happy and feel okay, and nobody wants to suffer. So identifying ourselves with others, we give this universal love to all beings. So in this way, we begin to tame our mind. We begin to let the mind become more quiet, more focused and attentive, and at the same time, we recharge our heart so that we can keep going and we don't get burned out. Because many people in the caring positions, they have too much compassion, they don't have enough wisdom, and so you bring in all this suffering and then it just sits there in your heart like a heavy stone, and in the end you can't take it anymore. So this is not useful. It's not useful for the person, it's not useful for those they wish to serve. So we have to learn how to unburden that, bring it in, but also let it go. And so in Buddhism, therefore, there is always the emphasis on compassion as one wing and understanding or wisdom as a second wing, so the bird can fly. If it's only got one wing, it just circles around. If we only have compassion but no wisdom, then we end up getting burned out. If we only have wisdom and no compassion, it all becomes very cold and intellectual. So we need to unite head and heart and become balanced. And meditation can be very helpful for releasing. So it doesn't need to sit there inside us, and in the end, we can't deal with it anymore, we give up. So taming the mind is very important. I mean, there are the beauty of the Buddha Dharma and is that it doesn't just say be good, be kind, be generous. It gives techniques to help with that, help us to develop this. So this is why also many people from many spiritual traditions, not just Buddhists, incorporate Buddhist techniques, because it helps them to become better Hindus, better Christians, even better Muslims. So this is not Buddhist with a big B, capital letters, but common sense on how to deal with our spiritual well-being in order that we can live a life which brings benefit to ourselves and benefit to others. We shouldn't only get unbalanced thinking only me, or only others. But in order to keep going, we need to breathe in for ourselves, we need to breathe out for others. And in that way, we stay healthy spiritually. So, the supreme spiritual discipline is to tame one's own mind. Once one's mind is tamed, everything else functions very easily. The ability to actually be present, to have a mind which is clear and calm and attentive and mindful, then that will benefit endless, whatever else we do. It's just, that's the foundation. And after that, everything else comes very easily. But if our minds are very distracted, and if we are, unable to really give attention to what we're doing, and our mind inside is very turbulent and untamed, then everything we do will be very superficial and cause lots of problems both for ourselves and for others. So the first thing is to tame the mind. The Buddha said our minds are like untamed monkeys. Well, you have monkeys here, so and monkeys, are very destructive actually, and very restless, and always jumping around, and they're not settled. They're not attentive. They are, monkey mind is a big problem for us here. So the first thing to do is to tame the monkey. We cannot train the monkey until the monkey is quieted down and tamed. So therefore the Buddha started by taming the monkey. So the supreme good quality is great altruism. So great altruism means this quality of bodhichitta. Bodhi, of course, means awakening. Chitta means the heart mind. So again, it's this aspiration that we will attain to awakening, not merely for the sake of our own liberation, but in order to be of genuine help and assistance to all other beings. Because all other beings, like ourselves, are also immersed in the ocean of samsara. They're all drowning. And if we can get on dry land, then that is the reason for helping to pull everyone else out of dry land. To change the analogy, if you consider we are all imprisoned in the prison of samsara, we're all in jail, whether we're up in penthouse suites or down in the dungeons, we are all in jail, we're all in prison. Then, if we find the key to get out, then we shouldn't slam the door behind us. You know, we open up the door and say to everybody, come on, quick, out, and empty the prison. So the whole point of finding the key and opening the door is in order to allow all the other prisoners to escape. So this aspiration, not just for this lifetime, but for endless lifetime, until samsara is empty, is called bodhichitta. And this is what Atisha went to study when he went to Indonesia, to Sumatra, and stayed for 12 years. He was studying all the texts and on this subject of universal compassion. And it's the basic difference in the Buddhist schools between the schools in the Theravada countries of Sri Lanka, Thailand and Burma, and those of the Mahayana countries of China, Korea, Vietnam, Tibet and Japan, is the motivation behind the efforts put into spiritual practice, whether it is simply in order to gain liberation and enter into nirvana for oneself. Teaching, of course, while in this lifetime, I mean, many Theravada teachers are absolutely wonderful, but nonetheless the aspiration is to get out of samsara. Whereas in the Mahayana, the aspiration is to gain that understanding of the nature of samsara, so that we are, in a way, neither in samsara nor nirvana. I mean, we're not just stuck in samsara, because our mind now has awakened and recognized that samsara and nirvana are two sides of the same coin. And therefore one is able to remain within the realm of samsara, but with the wisdom and skillful means to be able to benefit many beings. And this is also behind the idea of this tulku system in Tibetan Buddhism, where great masters vow to come back again, and then when they're babies or very young, they are recognized as the rebirth of the previous master and reinstated again and trained specially. So Tibet especially had all these lines of incarnate lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, for example. So you're the 9th this, the 12th that, the 16th this, you know, and the idea is that the same stream of consciousness has gone from birth to birth to birth, and is then recognized and trained in order that at a relatively early age they are able to serve again as spiritual masters and sources of refuge for the people. So, great altruism, the whole point is it's almost not what we do but why we do it, right? And so it means having a heart which opens up to recognize that just as I would rather be happy than not happy, and would really prefer not to have too much suffering, and would like to wake up in the morning feeling okay about everything. Everybody wants that. Even people who are really deluded and difficult, they do it because they think somehow it's going to bring them benefit. And all beings in their heart of heart would rather be happy than suffer. So therefore, to recognize that what I want is what everybody wants. And how can we give that? How can we do that for people? Well, even the Buddha himself could not liberate everybody. But we can, each of us, use our lives to be of benefit to whoever we can feel called to benefit. So many of you are in the helping services. And yesterday especially when we were listening to the musician playing for those children, what struck me so much was the incredible love that their carers were giving for these children, and their delight in the children's delight and participation. And so these children in many ways are very fortunate because they are surrounded by so much love. So those carers amongst you who are giving out so much love for those children, that's beautiful. But also do give love to yourself. And also give love to each other. And take that love which you feel for these children and extend it to everyone you meet. Because everybody wants happiness and is hurt in some way. And needs to feel that someone cares. So this heart which is open to all beings, recognizing the need of all beings for kindness and compassion, that is what we need to develop, that our love and our compassion becomes unconditional. Not just this lot, but not that lot. Those I don't love, those I don't care about, or I don't like. All beings. We're very similar, actually, when you strip off the outer. And so this sense of developing a good heart, which has altruistic love, and then taking that love and extending it to everyone. Recognizing whoever, if you're in a rickshaw, definitely you can think of the problems of that poor rickshaw boy who has to support his family and his children, and he has to marry off his daughters, and he has to see they get some kind of an education, so many worries, and maybe his wife is sick, and he's worried about himself becoming sick, because then who will support the family? So many worries. I mean, we just have to look around, and then, the very well-dressed businessman and IT expert also worrying about their job, and, the competition in the office, and, his wife is seeing somebody else, and, so many problems. Most people put on a nice facade, a nice mask, but behind it, so many worries, so many problems. Such insecurity, because life is insecure. And so to open the heart, to really feel empathy, not pity, but empathy with the sufferings of all beings, not just those who are overtly suffering, but all beings, even the ones who look most successful. Behind the scenes, it's probably not like that psychologically, inside. So boundless love and compassion, and a desire to practice the path in order to gain the wisdom to be of some benefit and some help to others as they need us. this is this great sense of embracing all beings, not just this lot, not that lot, all beings. Because underneath it all, and not just human beings, of course. I'd say again, sentient beings means all beings, animals, birds, beings in the waters, spirits, insects. All beings want happiness and don't want to suffer. So to open the heart, not close the doors on anything, even those who are most difficult for us. Doesn't mean we have to allow people to be abusive or cheat us, we don't have to be stupid. But our wisdom sometimes can be quite rockful, right? I mean, think of Durga. I mean, she may be smiling, but look what she's holding. Likewise, Tara, she's shown here sweet and smiling, but she has 21 forms, 21 aspects, and some of them are quite rough, quite fierce, and dark, like Kadampa. But the motivation is compassion. So just like a parent sometimes has to pretend to be angry towards the child in order to help the child become more disciplined and not harm themselves, likewise, sometimes we have to appear to be quite fierce. But the underlying intention is not anger or wish to harm, but compassion fueled by wisdom, clear seeing. So great altruism is the most important quality which we can try to develop. A great universal love. The supreme oral instruction is to observe the mind at all times. So, as I said in the beginning, Buddhism is very concerned with the mind, with the citta. And all our speech and actions are rooted in our mental intentions. So therefore, it is very important, just on that level, to know what we are thinking. Usually in meditation, as I said before, we start with observing the breath, because the breath is subtle in that it is connected with our mind. When we are fearful, when we are excited, when we are peaceful, when we are agitated, the breath mirrors our state of mind. And also, we cannot breathe in the past or in the future, we only can breathe now, right? So if our attention is linked with the breath, knowing the breath as it comes in and as it goes out, at that time our mind is present. It's very hard for our mind to stay present. The ego is most happy in the past or in the future. In the past with all its memories, and in the future with all its anticipations, fantasies and plans. But to stay nakedly, without commentary, in the present, actually, if we are really nakedly in the present, not thinking about the present, but really just knowing what's happening in that moment, at that moment there is no ego, because the ego cannot stay in the actual present. And so when we watch the breath and develop this bare attention, meaning that we know the breath without talking about it to ourselves, then the mind is present, and this is very, very refreshing for the mind. The mind feels very cool after that. But when our attention becomes very clear and we are able to really be present with the breath as it goes in and it goes out, we develop this quality of awareness, of mindfulness, and it becomes very powerful. We feel there is this awareness, we are the awareness, and then there is the breath. So the importance is on the awareness rather than the breath. We use the breath as a support, as a crutch, but the important thing is the sense of awareness. Now, when that awareness becomes quite strong and we can easily focus, keep our attention on the breath going in and out without being swept away by our thoughts, then as the attention becomes stronger, the flow of the thoughts begins to slow down. You don't need to slow it down, it just will naturally slow down. Because the more moments of attention, the less thoughts of, the less discursive thinking. Then, so now the mind is still thinking in the background here, but it's quieter. Meantime, our sense of awareness and presence is much stronger. Then we turn that searchlight of our attention back onto the mind itself. And instead of being swept along by the river, we are sitting on the banks of the river, watching the river going by. One great Lama described it as being like sitting in a train. You're in a train and then you're just looking out the window, and we might be passing slums, or we might be passing beautiful landscapes, or we might be passing anything, but we're just in the train. We're not getting out the train, right? We're not joining in what's going on outside. We are still in the train looking out. So this is observing the mind. And during practice, strict practice, then whatever comes up, slums or luxury apartments, it's all the same. Because we're in a train, just looking. It's just a passing scene. During the day, then it is very useful to know what the mind is doing, so that if the mind is in negative states, we can recognize it and change it. The sooner we change it, the better. I mean, if somebody does something which annoys us and we feel angry and upset, the quicker we notice that, the easier it is to transform it. If we don't notice it, then we are adding fuel along the way, and before you know it, we're saying very harsh things and we're engaged in an argument, or we're all pent up inside and angry and so that is because we have not been aware earlier that negative states were rising in the mind. Or we see something we like and greed and desire arises. The moment we catch it, we can just see, do we need this thing, do we not need this thing? But if we don't notice it, the next thing you know, we're in a shop buying it. And then we take it home and think, what did I buy this for? So it's important to know what is going on in the mind, because everything, our speech and actions all depend on the mind. And so we need to get to know our own mind. And the only way we can get to know the mind is to look at it. To be the witness of our mind instead of swept along by the mind. So if we know how to be aware of the mind, it's like, yes, it's like being a witness to the mind and not being caught up in it. We're not caught up in the flood. We're standing apart, and there is a space, and then there is the mind. And then we are in control of our mind, not by tightening it, but by allowing it to come up, seeing if it's negative or positive, transforming the negative, encouraging the positive. So this is a very, very important step in all spiritual paths, not just Buddhist. It's not ultimate reality, but it's a very important step towards that. Not to be identified with our thoughts. Because the fact that we can observe the thoughts shows we are not the thoughts. And normally we so closely identify with what we think that we believe everything we think. But we shouldn't believe everything we think, because actually all that's happening is that there are thoughts. Right? There's mental states rising and falling, rising and falling, rising and falling. Some are good and some are not so useful. But normally, because we're so immersed in it, we cannot step back. And especially emotions also. We are completely engulfed in our emotions. We've had no room to breathe. So if we can step out and observe emotions as emotions, thoughts as thoughts, there's space. And then we can evaluate that which is skillful and either let go of or transform that which is unskillful. This is an enormous step forward. So therefore, Atisha is saying that the supreme oral instruction is to observe the mind at all times. In other places he says, observe the mind 3 times in the day and 3 times at night, which is a little bit more doable. The yogis at our monastery advised me, when I was studying with them, to observe the mind, to make a commitment to observe the mind 3 times every hour. So this is doable, right? That one, you know, in Thich Nhat Hanh's Sangha, he's a great Vietnamese master, and in his Sangha they have what is called a mindfulness bell, and you can get it as an app on your phone. And it either at certain times, specific times, or at random, it just goes ding, and everybody stops. Whatever they're doing, they stop just for a few seconds and looks inside. At this moment, what is my mind doing? What is my body doing? In this moment, what is happening? And then they go on. But it trains the mind to come back into the present activity. And not just the action, but also the state of mind associated with that activity. So, as I say, when I was in our monastery, at that time they said, do that 3 times an hour, just for a few seconds. You know, just stop. What in this moment is going on inside? How do I feel? What am I thinking? How is my body at this moment? And then if the mind is cultivating negative thoughts, then to recognize that and accept it and change it. If everything is okay, no problem, then good, okay. So what happens is that if one does that, during the day, then the mind begins to get accustomed and of itself begins to just keep waking up. And gradually these moments of attention, of awareness, begin to get longer and maybe of themselves begin to multiply until finally they all fit together and we are observing the mind at all times. People go into retreats specifically to train for this. In a retreat situation, we can all be much more mindful, much more aware. If we're walking slowly, people don't think we're weird. We're not having to interact with others, so therefore it gives us the space within to cultivate this awareness, this mindfulness. And so we're retraining ourselves just to pay more attention. because the whole problem is distraction. Our minds are so distracted. It is said that nowadays children in the West, their attention span is about 4 seconds. You see it in things, nowadays the images change so quick, just flash, 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 flash. It's terrible for the mind. We have no attention. So the first thing that meditation does is to train our powers of attention. Nothing more esoteric than that. So that we can stay focused. As we stay focused, we gradually go deeper. Because we have so little attention anymore, our attention span is so short, there's no time to go below the surface. So it's all very superficial. If we can stay focused, then it begins to deepen and deepen and deepen and deepen. So it's very important for us to train our minds. But first we tame the mind, get the mind quieted down, our attention skills more honed, and then gradually the mind begins. It's like a horse. If we see a horse, which is a beautiful horse, but it is a wild horse, then what are we going to do? We want the horse to go right, it will go left. We want it to stop, it will start. It will gallop. We want it to gallop, it will stop. Because why? Because it's wild. So then first we need to tame it. He said start with taming the mind. Taming the horse means either we can beat the horse into submission, like those poor donkeys and things, they're just completely, sad, depressed, but doing what they're told. So you can do that with the horse. You can beat it into submission, and eventually it will throw you if it can. Or we can make friends with the horse. Give it nice things to eat, gradually stroke it, get the horse gradually to trust. Until finally the horse wants to cooperate, because he thinks, it might be quite fun to be trained actually. Yeah, okay, let's go along with this, it's nice. So like this with the mind, we can force the mind to concentrate. And in some techniques they do that. They force the mind to become very, very sharp, very, very tight, very, very moment to moment to moment. But often what happens is that finally the mind explodes and becomes more distracted, and also sometimes people get physically quite unbalanced. The prana gets totally unbalanced because you're making it too tight, and then it just it just goes chaotic. And so it's not a good method. It is much better to make friends with the mind and get the mind to want to cooperate. When we are reading an interesting book, when we're watching an interesting program, we don't have to force the mind to pay attention. The mind is interested, and so it wants to pay attention. It would be upset if someone interrupted, right? So this is what we need to do with our spiritual practice, is to get the mind really interested so that it wants to learn to concentrate, to gain more attention, to observe. Once the mind cooperates and is friendly, then it's very easy. And this is also why it is often more skillful to start with shorter sessions, not too long, so the mind gets tired and develops an aversion. Oh God, not more meditation. We're not fighting the mind. We're trying to get the mind to cooperate, because if the mind enjoys, then it's ready, or it's already half the battle won. We're already enjoying it. If we do something we enjoy, it doesn't seem any effort. So therefore, in the beginning, it's more skillful to keep your session short, do more, but short ones. Yeah, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, 50 minutes. I mean, slowly, like training. Just start slow and pace ourselves so that we stop. Also, a little bit before we need to stop, so that we have still that remembrance. Oh, that was fun, let's do that again. And sometimes our mind cooperates and settles down very easily. Other times it is like the wild horse, it wants to run everywhere except where we want it to go. And not to judge good or bad. That was a good session when the mind is settled, or that was a hopeless session when the mind is distracted. It was just a session. Not judging it. As long as we do it, that's the important thing. The problem only comes when we give up. Even if 100 times we have to bring our mind back and it goes off again and we bring it back, as long as we end up by bringing it back, that was a good session. Okay? It's very important. We have to work with the mind. Because the mind has incredible powers. But it doesn't get unlocked by banging. We have to be skillful, and then it opens up of itself. So we work slowly towards observing the mind. We cannot observe the mind at all times unless we are really very spiritually advanced. But what we can do is to make the determination to, throughout the day, bring our attention back to the mind. And just not really so much to correct it as to see what's going on in there. But of course, if we are in very negative states, then to observe that, to accept that, and then to work to transform that. This is what training is all about. We're training the mind now. By training the mind, first we tame the mind by learning how to develop attention and how to observe the thoughts. Then we train the mind to have positive thoughts and to deal skillfully with negative thoughts. And by training the mind, we naturally transform the mind. The mind transforms. And we become slowly in charge of the mind. Normally we are completely the slaves to our thoughts and feelings. And while the ego is a very good servant, it's a terrible master because it is ignorance. And so to be in the control of the ego and our negative thinking is a very sad state, and why so many people get depressed. So we need to become slowly the masters of our own mind, the masters of our own emotions. And the important step towards that is to actually observe what's going on in the mind and recognize we are not our thoughts and feelings. We have thoughts and feelings, but they're not me, they're not mine. So we need to become the witness of our mind, of our thoughts. Once we can witness the thoughts without identifying with them, we can change them, we can transform them, we can work with them. We always think we suffer because of external circumstances. But the real cause of suffering is within ourselves. Some people are in terrible, terrible outer situations but remain cheerful. Other people can seem outwardly to have everything, very comfortable and pleasant, and yet inwardly be very depressed. And we can see this very easily in that, people, for example, who have great wealth, we are always assured if only we had more money, we'd be better off and happier. But, if one meets with seriously wealthy people, one sees that they are in no way more happy than others. Many of them are alcoholics. Many of them are on antidepressant medication. And they certainly are not peaceful and at their ease. They are definitely not any kind of model that one would wish to aspire to. So it's not the outer comfort and pleasure which will bring us genuine happiness, but our inner comfort and pleasure of having a well-tamed mind. Then whatever outer circumstances we are facing, we will have the inner strength to deal with them and use them as our spiritual practice. So he says the supreme remedy, like in medicine for our sickness, is to know that nothing has any self-nature. So this goes along with the whole conception that our problem is that we reify everything. Reify means we make it into a thing. Re is the Latin word for a thing. So when we reify, it means we make it into something solid, real, self-existing from its own side. And Buddhist philosophy, and later the Vedanta, also recognized how much of what we perceive is our own projection. So for, several millennia now, 2.5 millennia, this idea that so much of what we see and that we think is so solid and real and self-existent from its own side, that if I died tomorrow, it would still be there, and not that I am in any way contributing to its reality. The fact that actually most of what we perceive, both ourselves and others and things, are very much conditioned by the kind of sense organs and brain and karma which we have as human beings. And so this was always regarded as being part of that kind of idealistic Asian thinking, which is why they never could do anything properly, and so forth, and it was very much looked down on in the West, except in the idealistic schools. But nowadays, what has become really very, very interesting is that this view that most of what we perceive is our own projection has been ratified both by modern quantum physics and also by neuroscientists. From both sides, they are saying actually nothing exists the way we perceive it as human beings. That this also solid log is, well, of course, first of all, it's atoms, and then the atoms themselves are protons and neutrons, and then within that, when you take it down and down and down, eventually you come to space and energy. But there's no thing in itself. When I was about 11 and changed school to go to senior school, grammar school, we, for the first time, were learning science. And so I thought, finally I will understand what is. I said to our physics teacher, well, when we reduce everything down to its lowest possible condition, what do we find? And she says, oh, neutrons and protons. And I thought, she doesn't know. And I lost interest in science at that point. But had she been giving it from a quantum point of view, then she would have gone on about space and energy and all these other things, and the unknowable quality of things. Then I would have maybe become a scientist. Many lamas, and of course His Holiness the Dalai Lama and others, are now becoming much more interested in modern science, because modern science is becoming much more interesting. It's no longer sort of materialistic, it's no longer, just things put together to make other things. That now they're discovering that you cannot find anything. The more you reduce and reduce and reduce, the more mysterious it becomes. And we cannot find the thing in itself. There is no thing in itself, which is what Asian philosophy has been saying for more than 2,000 years. But the other side, which is equally fascinating, are the discovery of neuroscientists. And that they are increasingly agreeing that what we perceive with our senses is not actually, just because we see something doesn't mean that that's how it really exists in itself. For example, one might see some kind of a vague, what does the eye see? This is the question. What does the actual sense organ of the eye see? What it sees is a very, very inverted, for a start, rough image, shape. And the mind immediately transforms that into an entity, into a color, shape, and a name. We label it, and then comes the I like it, I don't like it, and the comparison. All this in a millisecond. But all that comes from our mind. The actual imprint that we get on our sense organ is very, very rough. And so many years ago, I read a report which said that probably we get 70% from outside, 30% is given by the mind. Then a few years later, it was 30% from outside, 70% from the mind. And recently, Mingyur Rinpoche, who is very closely associated with neuroscientists nowadays, he's very fascinated by neuroscience, he said the latest neuroscientists are saying 97% is from us, 3% is from what's going on out there. Which is just what we've always been telling us. So it's quite fascinating, actually, that we are so sure that everything is just how we see it. And actually, it's all in the mind. Fascinating, isn't it? And so we should really get to know our mind. We should really understand how our minds work. And recognize that just because we see something or hear something or believe something doesn't make it so. This doesn't mean that nothing exists. In Buddhism, they talk about phenomena is like an illusion, like a mirage, like a dream, like a rainbow. But it's not a mirage, dream, illusion. It's like that. That's the closest we can get. It's not that we're all just dreaming it. I mean, my teacher was very emphatic about that. not exactly that it's all a hallucination, but the amount that we contribute to what we perceive through our senses is an enormous amount more than we thought. We used to think that we were just passive receptors of an active outer reality. Now they are realizing we're creating the whole thing moment to moment. The Buddha said the universe is created moment to moment by the karma of the beings inhabiting it. So we have the karma to perceive things the way we perceive it, which is different from how a dog would perceive it, or a cat, or a bird. But they have their own reality. It's not that our reality is more. It's just that as human beings, with the sense organs we have, and the kind of brain we have, this is how we perceive our reality. Moment to moment to moment, we're creating. It's fascinating, really. And this is why, again, His Holiness and others are encouraging their monastic Sangha as well as the children to study these sciences, especially these kind of sciences. And they send them abroad to study with, or invite scientists. Recently we got an invitation from the Tibetan government to send some nuns to do a science program with certain German scientists who have been working with monks and nuns to teach them about modern science, in order to help them to understand what they're studying in their traditional texts written 1,000 years ago. To really understand what is being said here. Ironically, modern science has been very useful because it shows, I mean, the idea is if you know, you can show it on a machine, it must be true. And of course, neuroscience particularly has a long way to go. I mean, their machines comparatively are very, very, gross. A while back, I was attending a talk by a neuroscientist. He was actually Indian. It wasn't in India, but he wasn't Indian, but he lived in the States, and he was a very eminent neuroscientist, having many awards. And he was doing a PowerPoint on the different parts of the brain and how they light up and things like this. And at the end, when I was talking to him personally, I said to him, yes, but what about consciousness? And he literally went like that. And he said, that is a word we never use. He said, that is the elephant in the living room. He said, frankly, we haven't got a clue what consciousness is. And I don't think, maybe we never will know, so we don't talk about it. We just talk about it, it's light up, neural pathways, so that they can talk about. That they can get on the machine. But the underlying energy, that they don't talk about. Except one Korean neuroscientist I met, who told me that, I don't know, but he said that they had shown that before the image appears in the brain, it is picked up in a moment of pure awareness here, and then transmitted instantly up to the brain. So the first moment of awareness is actually here, and then it gets transmitted to the brain. So I don't know, but he said that, which I thought was interesting. He also was a very eminent neuroscientist. So the Asian neuroscientists are more interested in, what is awareness, what is consciousness, that side of it, rather than more over emotions and thoughts. But it's fascinating that now finally science is beginning to catch up with wisdom which has been known in India and in Asia for millennia. And I think that this is very encouraging for both Western science and for the study of Asian thought, I mean, his whole, the scientist said, the quantum scientist said to His Holiness, I don't know how you know this, all this, without machines. And His Holiness said to the science, we don't know how you know this without meditating. So the two are coming together now, and this is good for both sides. That, these neuroscientists are studying these great meditators and coming up with pretty much the same answers that the great meditators have come through for thousands of years now. So it's interesting. Future, in that sense of quantum and neuroscience, is really quite interesting, what they will find. So, therefore, Atisha in the 10th century said, the supreme remedy is to know that nothing has any self-nature. So nothing exists in and of itself. And if we recognize that, then we don't feel any more greed and we don't feel any more anger. Because we recognize that the object of our greed, the object of our anger, is self-promoting. When we recognize that nothing has any self-nature from its own side, that most of it is projected onto it by our own mind, then what is there to be greedy and cling to? What is there to feel anger and aversion towards? It's all just a play of the mind. So if we realize that, then it drops away. What sustains our greed and our anger is our ignorance of how things really are. That we don't see things how they truly are. We project continually. So once we realize that, then the other two fall apart, our greed and our anger. There's nothing to hold on to. So to start that is to start by looking at the mind itself and recognizing that all our thoughts and feelings, they're like bubbles. They're very bright, very shiny, but empty. We think they're very solid, very real, how I feel, what I think, what I believe. Our memories especially become very solid and real, and just how I remember it. It's exactly how it is. This sustains our sense of identity. I did this here, I did that there, I felt this, I felt that. This gives a sense of continuity. But once we recognize that they're all like bubbles, empty in their nature, then there's nothing to cling to and nothing to feel aversion towards. And then the heart is liberated. And if we're not clinging inwardly, we won't cling outwardly. If we are not angry and upset inwardly, we won't be angry. So this is again why it's very important to observe the mind. Recognize we are not our thinking, it's a tool which we're using, but it's not who we are. Meditation isn't just for making us feel nice or getting into states of bliss. That's totally irrelevant. Meditation is for helping us to understand who we really are and who we really are not. And that mostly we identify with who we really are not. And therefore we suffer. And we don't just suffer, we cause others to suffer too. And we're trapped. So, first we start with recognizing that we are not who we think we are, and then outwardly, things are not what we think they are. Everything is just a play of our mind, our own projection. When we realize that, then all the rest falls apart. I mean, it's held together by the sense of I. When that dissolves, everything else dissolves around it. Because it's the I want, I don't want. Take away the spider, just the web falls apart. But it doesn't mean that, therefore, we cease to be. And it doesn't also mean that, therefore you can't prefer, I don't know, it is to chapatis. It doesn't mean that. Even the greatest masters like this don't like that so much, but they are not identified with that. It is this, you can use the mind, but we don't have to believe in it anymore. We don't have to identify with it. It becomes a tool we're using. And it's a very brilliant tool. We're not trying to not think, but we're trying to think skillfully. And at the same time not identify with the thought, thinking this is me and mine. So then he says the supreme conduct is to be in disharmony with the world. Now, many people say, oh, I think that was a misprint. Of course, he meant being in harmony with the world. Aren't we all supposed to be harmonious? But, of course, what he meant was that we should be in disharmony with the world. That doesn't mean that we fight with our neighbors or our family and, create lots of problems all around us. But it means that we are not in harmony with the values of the world. The Buddha said that anyone practicing the Dharma is like a fish swimming upstream when all the rest of the shoal, all the other fish are swimming downstream. So, in some ways, it's a very lonely journey because our values of what is important, what is not important, are very much in disharmony with the world. The world says, in order to be happy, you have to have money, you have to have status, you have to have big house, a bigger car, more promotions, and more you get, the happier you will be, the more pleasure and comfort we have, the happier we will be. This is the way for universal well-being. The more that we get, the happier we are all going to be. And even today, that's what is promoted. You see all these big luxury flats, only 98 lakhs starting. If only you had that plus a nice big Porsche or something, you would be so happy, happy, happy. And so it's around us everywhere. Buy this, buy that. And it's very hard for people, especially younger people, to ignore that propaganda which is put out by our capitalist society. Because it starts when they're very small. They already, when they're 3 years old, want to have branded, kind of clothing and the right kind of satchel and the right kind of shoes. I don't know in India, but certainly in the West, that's how it is now. And I'm sure in India it's more and more and more. And so the story which is being fed to us continually, that the more we get, the happier we will be, and the more comfort and pleasure we get, the happier we will be, is such, it's a lie. It's simply not true. And so nowadays, sociologists are studying this, because even they believed it before. Obviously, if we're all in, great penury, if we're in great poverty, we must be suffering. And obviously, if we're in great comfort and wealth, we must be happy. And now, when such a significant part of the population of the world is actually, compared with earlier years, very affluent and are more miserable than ever. That people are beginning to ask questions, what's wrong? Because, I mean, if you take like America as an example, people have a very high standard of living mostly. Of course, there is a big poverty level too. But nonetheless, in general, there's a large section of the population who are really very affluent. They have nice homes, they have big cars, they have more than enough food. They're very, very fussy nowadays, but anyway, they all have lots of food. They have lots of clothing, more than they could ever possibly wear in this lifetime or many future lifetimes. I mean, their cupboards are stacked. And they're still buying. And at the same time, such a significant percentage of the population are suffering from deep depression and are on these pills to make them feel better. Now, one of the major causes of death in the United States is because of these pills that people overdose. And, you know, there is a huge problem with depression and suicides and so forth. So sociologists themselves are asking, well, what's wrong? And they have also recognized that there is a kind of level for most people at which, if they attain that level, they will feel okay. And that means they have some security of housing, food, clothing, education for children, and some medical insurance of some sort. So it's not, they've also discovered it didn't matter too much the size of the house or how many cars you had. If you have one, you were probably as happy as if you had 5. But basic level of security. I mean, in fact, in Samsara there is no security, but nonetheless, on a material level, a certain level of security, then people felt okay. And they saw that if you suddenly got lots more, like you won the lottery, or you fell in love, or something, and there would be this huge rise in happiness level, and then within a year or two, they would come back down again. Or if something really awful happened, you lost somebody, or you had terminal sickness, down, and then back up again. So they discovered that actually it doesn't really, external factors, provided there is a basic level of security, does not impinge on our happiness level, which is exactly not what society is telling us. Society is telling us bigger house, more happiness, more cars, 1 car good, 3 cars even better. But they discovered that the first car is a big excitement, second car much less, by the third you could care. And so getting more and more does not lead to greater levels of satisfaction. The Buddha said that greed is like salty water. The more we drink, the more thirsty we become, but we never get satiated, we never get satisfied. So when the King of Bhutan came up with this gross national happiness, I'm not saying Bhutan is especially happy, but the idea that we should quantify the success of a country by the overall happiness of the people rather than their economic status was brilliant. And of course, even sociologists and economists and so forth actually have listened about that, because they can see now, for the first time, a large percentage of the population are physically okay. You know, they have houses, they have education, they have medical system, they have this, they have that, they have the other. And yet they're not happy. They're depressed. They're lonely. They feel confused. The main people that gain are the psychologists and I mean, everybody I know in America has a psychotherapist. It's like having a dentist. Everybody has a therapist. And they exchange about their different therapies. Why? So when Atisha says that the supreme conduct, the supreme way of acting is to be in disharmony with the world, essentially he was talking about that our value system, if we are on a spiritual path, is at variance with the world. We are interested in contentment, not getting more and more and more and feeling deprived. Contentment, appreciation, sharing and generosity. Thinking what can we give to the world instead of what can the world give to us. Just a whole re-evaluation of what we are here for. That brings us into disharmony with the world. The world is going here and we're trying to go there. Like the fish. This was said 1,000 years ago. The Buddha would have said the same 2,000 years ago. It's even more relevant today. That our value system in our corporate world is completely skewed and does not bring the level of satisfaction and happiness which we are assured it will. It doesn't work. Now, this doesn't mean that everybody has to leave their work and go forth like the Buddha leaving his palace. Although, had the Buddha not left his palace and his family, he would not have become a Buddha, and we would not be sitting here today. So, but it doesn't mean everybody has to give everything up. But it does mean that we have to re-evaluate where our energy is going. And many of you have done that already. That so much of your time is given to really caring for others, and especially for those that society has cast aside because they're not useful. So to be in disharmony with the world doesn't mean, as I say, that we are quarreling with all our neighbours. But we might be quarreling with our neighbours. But nonetheless, what it does mean is that our whole value system is going in a different direction, and that we feel our genuine happiness is an inner sense of joy and a sense of contentment, of appreciation for what we have already, and a joy in simplicity and in sharing, and recognizing that true happiness lies within. It's nothing to do with what we have on the outside. Just recently, as I said, we were on pilgrimage to a place called Jambi in Sumatra, and that's in Indonesia. And so the majority of the people there are Muslim, with a significant proportion of Chinese who are Buddhists. And so these monastic settlements, which they're now starting to excavate, are surrounded by Muslim villages. And most of the excavations actually under these Muslim villages and fields, so they're not dealing with those. But as a result, the people that were our guides and the people that we were associating with while we were staying there were all Muslim. And first of all, they were so excited that these monastic sites had been found in their district, and assured us that they would take care of them because they were so proud of their Buddhist history, and we were not to worry, that they would preserve them very nicely and respect them, and they were very, very happy that, that they had had this Buddhist history. But the thing which really struck us was how happy they were. They lived so simply. Most of them were in houses on stilts with thatched roofs. And there, you know, you wanted a cup of coffee, you had to, the beans, you had to pound them like this for hours, and sift them and pound them, and then you could get a cup of coffee. I mean, so their lifestyle was very, very simple. Really very, very simple. And they had such happiness. I rarely met with such a happy people. They all smiled, complete strangers could just smile, and they were so kind. And, you know, like, as I say, this pounding the coffee, and then at this kind of tea stall, and then we said, oh, well, maybe we'll try the coffee. Their coffee is like Vietnamese coffee, they make with condensed milk and filter it. And so we all had these delicious cups of coffee. And then they wouldn't take any money from it. They said, no, no, it's our offering. So people, we were saying before, people who are quite poor are the ones who are the most generous. You know, the more affluent people get, the more tight-fisted they get. When they have nothing, they're happy to share. And so it just struck me that these people living very, very simple lives, they were so friendly with each other. At one point we were sitting having the coffee, and then the young men who were driving us in there on their motorbikes to the sites, because the road was so bad they couldn't pick up, just spontaneously started dancing. I have a whole video of them all dancing and singing away, and just a kind of joy. And yet, outwardly, according to sociologists, according to the economists, they should have been miserable in despair. They had nothing. What's the matter with them? How dare they be so light-hearted and so generous? So, yes, it's very important for us to recognize what is important and what is not. What does give joy? What does give inner happiness? And not to believe society and the corporate consumer society which says that more is better. Because, you know, yes, you have to have food, you have to have hope, you have to have a family, you have to have good friends, you have to have enough security that you know what you're going to eat tomorrow, next week, next year. But beyond that, actually we don't need that much. You know? How many clothes do you ladies need? Huh?
Why are you asking the men?
Well, because the men usually don't care so much. But the women, I mean, you go to a wedding, you know, you have to have at least 5 sets of clothing. And it's okay, but don't think happiness lies there. That's the point. And, you know, yes, it's okay to have, but not to think that that is what is going to be the basis of genuine inner satisfaction, because, as I say, the Buddha said we can drink the whole ocean and we will still be thirsty and sick at the same time. So disharmony with the world means not to hold to the world's values of what is meaningful and what is not meaningful. We need to recognize that our purpose in life is not getting more and more, but giving more and more. Not just material goods, but of ourselves and of our understanding, of our love, of our wisdom, sharing. And that will bring genuine satisfaction and genuine happiness. So that's not what we are being told on our advertisements. But that is what we really need to hold to stay not believing everything we're told by the advertising world, and to recognize that inner satisfaction is not gained by just outwardly piling up